The Kairesh Empire had ruled the galaxy for over 3,000 years. Their power wasn't just in their warships or their armies. No, their real strength came from creatures that haunted the nightmares of every species they conquered. The sacred devourers. Dragons. Massive beasts of obsidian scales and burning plasma that fed on living, thinking beings. On the human colony of Redstone, people had learned to live under Kairesh rule the way you learn to live with a constant headache. You kept your head down, paid your taxes, and prayed they'd leave you alone. For 5 years, the colony had managed. They mined ore, grew crops in underground farms, and sent their tribute to the Empire on time. Then the drought came. 2 harvests failed. The main excavator broke down, and replacement parts took months to arrive. When tax collection day came around, Governor Jack Miller stood in front of the Kairesh tax collector with empty hands and a sick feeling in his stomach. The collector didn't yell. Didn't threaten. Just pulled up the standard punishment protocol on his datapad and showed it to Miller. 1 child. To be fed to the sacred devourer stationed on Redstone. That was the price for failure. Miller tried to negotiate. Offered to double next quarter's payment. Promised to work around the clock. The collector just stared at him with those cold, alien eyes and repeated the terms. 1 child. By sunset. Non-negotiable. The selection happened in the colony school. 300 families lined up in the dusty yard while Kairesh soldiers walked through, scanning the children. They had criteria nobody understood. Age, health, something in the genetic markers. The children who passed the scan got a green light. Those who didn't stayed with their parents. Little Katie Brooks got a green light. She was 4 years old, barely tall enough to see over the benches in the classroom. She held her stuffed rabbit against her chest, the one her dad had sewn for her birthday. She didn't understand what was happening. Just knew that the scary aliens were pointing at her and her mom was crying. Her mother, Dr. Helen Brooks, tried to pull Katie back. A Kairesh soldier hit her with an electric prod. She collapsed, and her husband Ben caught her before she hit the ground. Other parents surged forward. More prods. More screams. The soldiers raised their weapons, and everyone froze. Katie was marched out of the schoolyard. Behind her, the entire colony was being herded toward the ceremonial feeding grounds. The Kairesh always made it a public event. A reminder. This is what happens when you fail us. The feeding grounds were just a cleared area outside the colony walls, a natural amphitheater of red stone. Force barriers went up around the perimeter, trapping the colonists in a ring. They could watch but not interfere. Katie stood alone in the center, still holding her rabbit, looking around for her parents in the crowd. Then the ground shook. The dragon's cave was carved into the cliffside, and now something massive was moving inside it. Everyone went silent. Even the Kairesh soldiers stepped back behind their barriers. Torvax emerged into the fading sunlight. 30 meters from nose to tail. Scales like polished black glass. Eyes that glowed within a fire. When he breathed, you could see plasma energy crackling between his teeth. He'd been eating sentient beings for the Kairesh for over a century. Hundreds of victims. Maybe thousands. Every species in the sector had lost someone to him. He moved forward slowly, his massive clawed feet leaving impressions in the stone. His head alone was bigger than most of the colony's vehicles. Katie looked up at him, and up, and up. She should have been terrified. Should have been screaming. Instead, she took 3 small steps forward. The crowd gasped. The Kairesh observers leaned in, interested. Nobody ever approached the sacred devourers willingly. Torvax lowered his enormous head, bringing his face level with the tiny human child. His breath washed over her, hot enough that her hair blew back. His jaws could swallow her in one bite. In 3 seconds, this would be over. Katie reached out with one small hand and touched his snout, right between his glowing eyes. Her palm was tiny against his scales. She looked at him, really looked at him, and said something nobody expected. "You're scared too, aren't you?" The dragon froze. Completely still, like someone had turned him to stone. Katie kept her hand on his face. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'm scared too. But maybe we don't have to be scared together." For the first time in 3,000 years of the Kairesh Empire, a sacred devourer didn't eat its tribute. Torvax just stared at this little human child who had touched him gently, who had recognized his fear, who had offered him something he'd forgotten existed. Kindness. 3 days passed, and Torvax still hadn't eaten Katie. The Kairesh handlers were getting nervous. This had never happened before. Sacred devourers consumed their tributes immediately. That was the whole point. Fear, death, and a public reminder of who held the power. But Katie was still alive, living inside the dragon's cave. The Kairesh stationed guards at the entrance, monitoring everything with cameras and sensors. What they saw confused them even more. The little girl wasn't cowering in a corner, waiting to die. She was talking to the dragon. Constantly. About everything and nothing. About the stars she could see from the cave entrance. About her stuffed rabbit named Hoppy. About how her mom made the best apple pancakes in the colony, even though apples were hard to grow on Redstone. Torvax listened. At first, he just watched her with those glowing eyes, his massive body coiled in the shadows. But slowly, something changed. When Katie got cold at night, he moved closer, letting her sleep against his warm scales. When she shared her food rations, he noticed she gave him the bigger portions, even though she was the one who needed to eat. Nobody had ever given him anything before. For a century, the Kairesh had given him only pain and hunger. Feed or be punished. Kill or suffer. That was his entire existence. Katie didn't know any of that history. She just knew he seemed lonely. So she did what 4-year-olds do. She decided they were friends now. On the 4th day, she was humming a song her dad used to sing at bedtime. Torvax made a sound, a deep rumbling that shook dust from the cave ceiling. Katie stopped humming. Then the dragon made the sound again, trying to match her tune. His voice was like distant thunder, but he was trying to sing with her. Katie's face lit up. You like music? Over the next week, something impossible happened. Torvax began to speak. Not in roars or growls, but actual words. His vocal cords weren't designed for human language, so he used controlled bursts of plasma, modulating the energy to create sounds. It was slow and difficult, but he was determined. His first word was her name. K-T. She clapped her hands. Yes. I'm Katie. What's your name? Your real name, not the scary one they call you. The dragon was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of memory and loss. Torvek. My name was Torvek. That's a nice name, Katie said simply. I like it better than Torvax. Through their conversations, Katie learned things that would change everything. Torvek's species, the Vex Ka, hadn't always been weapons. They'd been people once. A civilization. They'd studied the stars, created art, raised families. Then the Kairesh came with their weapons and their genetic engineering and their conditioning programs. The Kairesh had taken Vex Ka eggs, hatched them in captivity, and raised them in pain. Every time a young dragon showed gentleness, they were shocked. Every time they refused to hurt someone, they were starved. Generation after generation, the Empire had tried to breed out everything that made them people, turning them into nothing but fangs and fire. But they'd failed. Not completely, but enough. Deep inside, Torvek remembered his mother's voice. He remembered the taste of starfruit from his homeworld. He remembered being young and watching meteor showers with his siblings, back before the Kairesh took everything. Katie cried when he told her these things. She threw her arms around his massive foreleg, the only part of him she could actually hug, and said, "That's not fair. That's not fair at all." Fair, Torvek repeated, tasting the word. The Kairesh do not understand fair. Only power. Well, they're mean, Katie declared. And I don't like them. Outside the cave, the Kairesh administrators were having heated arguments. This sacred devourer was clearly defective. The protocol was obvious. Destroy it and punish the colony for contaminating their weapon. But something made them hesitate. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was bureaucracy. Whatever the reason, they gave it a few more days. That delay was their first mistake. Inside the cave, Katie taught Torvek hand games. Pat cake. Rock paper scissors, modified because he only had claws. She taught him jokes, even though he didn't always understand them. She asked him about his life, really asked, like his experiences mattered. And Torvek taught her things too. He showed her how the Vex Ka could sense magnetic fields, how they navigated by feeling the pull of planets and stars. He taught her some words in his original language, sounds that hummed in the chest rather than the throat. He told her stories his mother had told him, tales of the Vex Ka homeworld before the conquest. At night, Katie would curl up against his side, using his foreleg as a pillow. "You're my best friend," she'd mumble, half asleep. Torvek would watch over her, this tiny human child who'd somehow seen past 3,000 years of conditioning and recognized him as a person. She'd touched him without fear. Spoken to him without hatred. Given him something the Kairesh had tried to destroy forever. Hope. On the 10th day, the Kairesh made their decision. Torvek was to be terminated. the human colony would be punished. The child would be fed to a replacement sacred devourer who would actually do its job. The order came down from Sector Command. But the Kairesh had forgotten something important. They'd spent so long treating dragons as weapons that they'd forgotten weapons can be turned against you. And they'd never realized that a weapon that remembers it was once a person is the most dangerous thing in the universe. When the kill squad entered the cave at dawn, Torvek was waiting. For the first time in a century, he fought not because he was ordered to, not because he was conditioned to, but because he chose to. He had someone to protect now. Someone who mattered. The battle for Redstone had begun, and neither humans nor Kairesh were ready for what came next. The Kairesh kill squad came at dawn with plasma rifles and sonic disruptors, weapons specifically designed to bring down sacred devourers. They'd done this before, terminating defective dragons that stopped following orders. It was supposed to be routine. It wasn't routine. Torvek fought like he'd never fought before. Not with the mindless rage the Kairesh had conditioned into him, but with purpose. With strategy. He kept Katie behind him, using his body as a shield, while his tail swept soldiers off their feet. Plasma breath carved through their equipment but carefully avoided the colonial housing beyond. He was protecting, not destroying. The Kairesh hadn't trained him for that. The fight spilled out of the cave into the feeding grounds. Alarms wailed across the colony. People ran from their homes, confused and terrified. Then they saw it. The dragon who was supposed to eat their children, fighting the aliens who tormented them for 5 years. And on his back, clutching his scales, was little Katie Brooks. Her mother Helen saw her first. Without thinking, without caring about the plasma fire lighting up the dawn sky, she ran toward them. Her husband Ben was right behind her. Then others. Teacher Danny White. Engineer Lisa Chen. Farmer Rick Martinez. If the dragon was fighting the Kairesh, then maybe, just maybe, this was their chance. The tunnels, someone shouted. It was old Gary Peterson, who'd worked the mines before the colony was established. The old mining tunnels under the eastern ridge. They don't know about those. Torvek understood. He'd learned enough human language now. With Katie clinging to his neck, he charged toward the colony's edge, his massive body bulldozing through Kairesh soldiers. The colonists ran interference, throwing tools, equipment, anything to slow down their oppressors. Helen Brooks reached her daughter as Torvek crashed through the entrance to the abandoned mine. Katie reached down, and Helen grabbed her hand, and suddenly she was being pulled up onto the dragon's back too. Ben scrambled up after them. Then Danny, who'd taught Katie her letters. Then Lisa, who'd fixed Katie's toy robot last month. They plunged into darkness, the dragon's glowing eyes lighting the way. Behind them, plasma fire scorched the tunnel entrance, but Torvek's armored hide protected them from the heat. They went deep, following Gary's shouted directions, until the sounds of battle faded to distant rumbles. In a wide chamber that had once been a mining depot, they finally stopped. Emergency lights flickered on, powered by an old generator that somehow still worked. 24 humans and one massive dragon, all breathing hard, all realizing what they'd just done. They'd just declared war on the Kairesh Empire. Katie slid down from Torvek's back and immediately hugged her mother. Helen held her tight, tears streaming down her face. But Katie pulled back after a moment. "Mom, this is my friend Torvek. He's not scary. He's nice." Helen looked up at the dragon who could swallow her daughter whole. Torvek looked back, and in his glowing eyes, she saw something she never expected. Intelligence. Consciousness. And guilt. So much guilt. "Thank you," Helen whispered. "Thank you for not hurting her." Torvek's voice rumbled through the chamber, that strange plasma-modulated speech he'd learned. "I hurt many others. Before. Many children. I remember, all of them." The chamber went silent. Nobody knew what to say to that. Katie touched Torvek's foreleg. "But you're different now. You're remembering who you really are." "Yes," the dragon said. "Remembering. And others are remembering too." That's when he told them everything. About the psychic network that connected all Vex Ka across the galaxy. The Kairesh knew about it but had never bothered to sever it because they thought dragons were too broken, too conditioned to use it for anything except basic mating calls. They were wrong. For 10 days, while Katie had been teaching Torvek songs and games, he'd been broadcasting through that network. Not words, exactly. More like feelings. Sensations. The touch of a small hand on his snout. The sound of childish laughter. The warmth of someone sleeping trustingly against his scales. The recognition that he was a person, not a weapon. And across the galaxy, Other dragons were receiving those transmissions. Torvek wasn't the only one who remembered the old days. Every sacred devourer had memories buried deep, memories of family and culture and freedom. The Kairesh had suppressed those memories with pain and conditioning, but they'd never erased them completely. Now those memories were waking up. How many? Governor Jack Miller asked. He'd followed them into the tunnels along with his security team. How many dragons are there? Torvek's mind reached out through the psychic network, touching consciousness after consciousness. Thousands. Across hundreds of worlds. All enslaved. All remembering now. All asking the same question. What question? Helen asked. The dragon's eyes blazed brighter. If one human child could see me as a person, what would happen if more humans knew the truth? Ben Brooks, who'd been quiet until now, suddenly laughed. It was a slightly hysterical sound. You're talking about a prison break. A galaxy-wide prison break. Yes, Torvek said simply. Danny White pulled out his datapad. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. We need to contact Earth. The colonial authority. Hell, anyone who'll listen. If what you're saying is true, if the Kairesh's main weapon is actually thousands of enslaved people who are starting to remember their people, then the Empire's greatest strength becomes its greatest weakness, Lisa finished. She was grinning despite the insanity of it all. Oh, they're going to regret the day they tried to feed Katie to a dragon. Governor Miller was already on his communicator, punching in emergency codes. This is Redstone Colony to any Earth vessel in range. Priority Alpha situation. We have intelligence that could change the entire balance of power in this sector. Repeat, game-changing intelligence. Katie, who'd been quiet while the adults talked strategy, tugged on Torvek's foreleg. Does this mean you're going to help free your friends? Yes, little one. Good, she said firmly. Nobody should be a slave. And nobody should be alone. Through the psychic network, Torvek sent out a new message. Not just memories of kindness, but a call to action. A little human girl had recognized him as a person when no one else would. Now it was time for all the Vex Ka to remember what they'd been before the Kairesh broke them. The response that came back was like a rising tide. Thousands of dragon minds, stirring from a long nightmare. All asking the same thing. How do we fight back? Torvek looked at the humans around him. At Katie, who'd saved him with nothing but compassion. At Helen and Ben, who'd chosen to trust him despite everything. At the colonists who'd risked their lives to help him escape. He finally had his answer. Together. The message from Redstone reached Earth 3 weeks later. By then, the colony was under full lockdown. Kairesh warships orbited overhead, trapping everyone underground. They'd cut power, water, and communications. The Empire was making an example of what happened when you harbored a defective sacred devourer. But the Kairesh had made a critical mistake. They assumed cutting off the colony would contain the problem. They didn't realize the problem had already spread across half the galaxy. In the tunnels beneath Redstone, Katie sat with Torvek in the darkness, sharing a ration bar. She turned 5 years old down here, though there hadn't been much of a celebration. Just a small cake her mom had made from stored flour and synthetic eggs, and a song from Torvek that made the tunnel walls vibrate. Are your friends okay? Katie asked, breaking off a piece of the ration bar for him even though he'd told her 100 times he didn't need human food. Torvek's consciousness spread through the psychic network, touching distant mines. On a mining world called Thresh 9, a dragon named Kevral had refused to execute prisoners. On the industrial planet Ketaprime, a sacred devourer called Vixstar had turned on her handlers when they tried to force her to burn a residential district. On station after station, world after world, dragons were remembering. And the Kairesh were panicking. They resist, Torvek rumbled. But they need help. They need what you gave me. Someone to see them as people. Helen Brooks, who was organizing the medical supplies nearby, overheard. Then we'll have to teach others. If Earth ever responds to our message. Earth responded. 3 months after the lockdown began, the first ships arrived. Not a military fleet, though there were warships. The United Earth Coalition had sent something far more valuable. Specialists. Xenopsychologists like Dr. Amy Foster, who'd spent her career studying non-human intelligence. Linguists like Professor David Kim, who could decode the Vex Ka psychic network. Former soldiers like Captain Nicole Jensen, who understood asymmetric warfare. And diplomats like Ambassador Robert Chen, who'd been negotiating with alien species since before Katie was born. But the real weapon Earth sent was something the Kairesh never anticipated. Volunteers. Hundreds of ordinary humans who'd heard Katie's story and wanted to help. Teachers, engineers, doctors, mechanics. People who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was offer friendship to someone who'd forgotten what friendship felt like. The plan was insane. Captain Jensen laid it out in the main cavern, using a holographic display that showed the entire sector. We can't fight the Kairesh military directly. They outnumber us 100 to 1. But we don't need to fight their military. We need to free their weapons. Torvek's massive head appeared over the crowd, his glowing eyes reflecting in the hologram. There are 2,417 Vex Ka in Kairesh service. I can feel them through the network. Most are beginning to remember. But memory alone is not enough. They need to know they have allies. That freedom is possible. Dr. Foster stepped forward. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. We've been studying the bond between Katie and Torvek. What happened wasn't magic. It was psychology. Empathy meeting loneliness. Recognition meeting isolation. We can replicate it, but it has to be genuine. We can't fake compassion. Ambassador Chen nodded. We'll need to make contact with dragons on multiple worlds simultaneously. The Kairesh will respond with force the moment they realize what's happening. We'll only get one shot at this. Over the next 2 months, human teams prepared. They studied everything Torvek could tell them about Vex Ka culture, language, and psychology. They learned the signs of a dragon who was starting to remember versus one still fully conditioned. They practiced approaches, studied body language, and most importantly, they learned to see dragons as people instead of monsters. Katie became their unexpected teacher. She'd sit with the new arrivals and explain, in her simple 5-year-old way, how to talk to Torvek. You can't be scared, she'd say. Well, you can be scared, but you have to be brave too. And you have to really listen. Torvek has lots of important things to say. The adults learned more from watching her than from any briefing. How she touched Torvek's scales gently when he was remembering painful things. How she'd change the subject when his eyes dimmed with guilt. How she'd celebrate small victories, like when he learned a new word or remembered a happy memory from before his enslavement. Finally, they were ready. 20 teams. 20 worlds. Each team consisted of human specialists and a connection to Torvek through the psychic network, so he could introduce them to the local sacred devourer. The operation launched on a Tuesday. Katie insisted on staying up to watch, even though it was past her bedtime. Helen held her on one side, Torvek's massive head rested near them on the other, and together they watched the holographic displays showing 20 different worlds. On Thresh 9, Dr. Foster's team approached the dragon Kevral during his feeding time. Instead of bringing prisoners, they brought music. The dragon stopped mid-roar, confused. Through the psychic network, Torvek whispered, "Listen, brother. Remember when sound was beautiful, not weapon." On Ketaprime, a teacher named Julie West sat down in front of Vixtar's cave and started reading a children's book out loud. It was the same book Katie loved. Vixtar emerged, suspicious, but didn't attack. Just listened. Through the network, "Remember stories, sister. Remember when words were magic." On station after station, the pattern repeated. Humans offering not violence or demands, but connection. Recognition. The simple radical act of treating enslaved dragons as people worth knowing. The Kairesh responded exactly as predicted. Panic. They sent kill squads to terminate the defective sacred devourers. They locked down the facilities. They increased the conditioning protocols on dragons who hadn't been contacted yet. But they were too late. The psychic network was ablaze with awakening consciousness. Dragons who'd been weapons for centuries were remembering their names. Their families. Their dreams. And they were angry. Not the mindless rage the Kairesh had programmed into them. Something far more dangerous. Righteous fury backed by purpose and coordination. On 40 worlds, dragons stopped following orders. Some fought their handlers directly. Others simply refused commands, letting prisoners escape, ignoring execution orders. The Kairesh Empire's primary enforcement mechanism was collapsing in real time. In the tunnels of Redstone, Katie watched the holographic reports and clapped her hands. They're doing it. Torvek, your friends are doing it. The dragon's voice carried hope for the first time in a century. Yes, little one. We are remembering. We are rising. And we have humanity to thank for showing us the way. Captain Jensen studied the tactical displays, a grim smile on her face. The Kairesh are scrambling. They're pulling military assets from border regions to deal with the dragon revolts. They're creating gaps in their defenses. Ambassador Chen was already on the communicator with other species the Empire had conquered. The subject races are watching this happen. If we play this right, the whole Empire could collapse from within. But Helen Brooks, doctor and mother, asked the question everyone was thinking. What happens when the Kairesh realize they can't control the dragons anymore? What's their next move? The answer came 3 days later, and it was worse than anyone imagined. The Kairesh High Command made their decision in a secret emergency session. If they couldn't control the sacred devourers anymore, they'd eliminate them. All of them. 2,000 dragons across the galaxy, terminated simultaneously before the rebellion could spread further. The kill order went out on a Friday morning. Specialized hunter teams deployed to every world where dragons were stationed. These weren't regular soldiers. They were exterminators, equipped with weapons designed specifically to pierce VexKa armor and shut down their plasma cores. Torvek felt it through the psychic network the moment the first dragon died. A bright consciousness on a world called Petra 7, suddenly gone. Snuffed out like a candle. Then another. And another. His roar shook the tunnels beneath Redstone. Katie, who'd been coloring pictures nearby, dropped her crayons and ran to him. What's wrong? What's happening? They're killing us. Torvek's voice was raw with pain. The Kairesh are killing all VexKa. Everywhere. At once. The command center erupted into chaos. Captain Jensen started barking orders. Ambassador Chen was on 3 communicators at once. Dr. Foster pulled up the psychic network data, her face pale as she watched consciousness after consciousness wink out. Helen Brooks pulled Katie close, but the little girl squirmed free. She climbed up onto Torvek's foreleg, small hands on his scales. We have to help them. We have to save your friends. We can't reach them in time, Captain Jensen said, and the helplessness in her voice was crushing. They're spread across hundreds of light years. Would need an army, and would need it now. That's when Katie said something that changed everything. Then ask for an army. Everyone stared at her. She looked around at all the confused adult faces. You told other people about Torvek, right? About how the dragons are actually nice and the bad guys are making them do mean things. So tell everyone. Tell the whole galaxy. People will help. I know they will. Ambassador Chen's eyes went wide. Open broadcast. If we transmit what's happening on every available channel, show the evidence, explain what the VexKa really are. The other species under Kairesh rule will see their chance, Captain Jensen finished. And the ones who aren't under their rule will see a moral imperative. Dr. Foster was already pulling files together. We have documentation. Video of Katie and Torvek. Testimony from freed dragons. Proof of the genetic engineering and conditioning programs. If we release all of it, we start a war, Governor Miller said quietly. A big one. Torvek lifted his massive head. Through the psychic network, he could feel his people dying. But he could also feel them fighting back. On a dozen worlds, dragons who'd been weapons for centuries were now protecting the very prisoners they'd been ordered to execute. On mining stations, VexKa were holding off Kairesh soldiers so enslaved workers could escape. They were remembering who they'd been. They were choosing who they wanted to be. The war already started, Torvek said. The moment Katie touched me and saw a person instead of a monster. Now we finish it. The broadcast went out on every frequency humans could access. It hijacked Kairesh military channels. It overrode emergency networks. Within hours, it had spread to every corner of the known galaxy. The message was simple. A 5-year-old girl sitting next to a dragon, explaining in her own words what had happened. How the scary dragon wasn't scary at all once you got to know him. How he had a real name and memories and feelings. How the Kairesh had hurt him and thousands like him, and now they were trying to kill them all just for remembering they were people. Katie looked into the camera with those big, serious eyes. Please help them. They're good people who got hurt really bad, and they need friends right now. Everybody deserves friends. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Species that had suffered under Kairesh rule for generations saw their opening. Within days, rebellions erupted on 50 worlds. Not just the dragons, but everyone. Workers threw down their tools. Soldiers refused orders. Governors declared independence. The subject races of the Empire, inspired by a child's compassion and a dragon's courage, decided they'd had enough. But it wasn't just the conquered species who responded. The free civilizations, the ones beyond Kairesh borders, mobilized too. The Centauri Alliance sent warships. The Andromedan Collective dispatched medical teams and supplies. Even species that barely knew what humans were showed up, because the principle mattered. Enslaved people deserved freedom, and those strong enough to help had an obligation to do so. The war lasted 18 months. Not because the Kairesh were winning, but because dismantling a 3,000-year-old empire took time. Every freed world needed aid. Every liberated population needed support. And every rescued dragon needed help remembering how to be Vex Ka again, not sacred devourers. Katie turned 7 during the war. She spent most of it in the tunnels of Redstone, which had become an unexpected symbol of resistance. But she'd also visited other worlds, always with Torvek, helping newly freed dragons adjust to freedom. She was good at it. She'd sit with them and share snacks and tell them about constellations, and somehow that simple kindness helped them more than any therapy session. The final battle happened at Kethra Prime, the Kairesh homeworld. The Allied fleet, led by Earth ships and carried by Vex Ka volunteers who'd learned to fly again, surrounded the planet. They offered terms. Surrender. Face justice for slavery and genocide. Acknowledge the personhood of every species you've oppressed. Build a future based on cooperation, not domination. The Kairesh High Command refused. They'd rather burn their own world than admit they were wrong. But the Kairesh people, the ordinary citizens who'd lived under their government's tyranny too, made a different choice. They overthrew their own leadership. Opened the planetary shields. Asked for mercy they probably didn't deserve. The Allied forces gave it to them anyway. Because that's what Katie had taught them. Compassion wasn't weakness. Mercy wasn't surrender. Sometimes the strongest thing you could do was choose kindness when cruelty would be easier. 5 years after Katie touched a dragon's snout and changed the galaxy, she stood in the Grand Assembly Hall on the neutral station of Unity 1. She wore a formal dress her mom had made, though she'd insisted on comfortable shoes because the fancy ones hurt. Next to her stood Torvek, who'd spent months learning to fit through human-sized doorways for this occasion. Katie was Earth's youngest ambassador. Torvek was speaker for the Vex Ka Congressional Mind, a restored form of psychic democracy his people hadn't practiced in 3,000 years. The assembled representatives of 40 species waited for them to speak. Some of these species had fought in the war. Others had provided support. All of them had come together because of what had started in a cave on Redstone. Katie stepped up to the podium. Someone had put a box there so she could reach the microphone. She looked out at the thousands of beings, took a deep breath, and spoke. Hi. I'm Katie. This is my friend Torvek. 5 years ago, some mean people tried to make him eat me because my home didn't have enough money. But Torvek didn't eat me. He was brave enough to remember being nice, even when being nice got him in trouble. And I figured out that sometimes the scariest looking people are actually the loneliest, and they just need somebody to be their friend. She paused, thinking. The entire assembly waited in silence. I think that's what we all learned. That being strong doesn't mean being mean. That the best way to stop bad people isn't to become bad people too. And that everybody, no matter how different they look or where they come from, deserves to be treated like they matter. Because they do matter. All of us matter. Torvek added his voice, that deep resonant rumble that translated through speakers into every language represented in the hall. The Kairesh tried to make us forget we were people. They almost succeeded. Then a human child reminded us with nothing but kindness and truth. My people are free now because humanity saw us when no one else would. We will spend the rest of our existence honoring that gift. What no one had predicted, 5 years ago when a little girl touched a dragon's face, was that single act of compassion would topple an empire. That recognizing someone's personhood when everyone else saw only a weapon would spark a revolution. That sometimes the most powerful force in the universe wasn't military might or technological superiority, but the simple human belief that everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst day. The Kairesh had ruled through fear for 3 millennia. A 5-year-old girl with a stuffed rabbit had defeated them with something they'd never understood and could never replicate. Hope. Friendship. And the revolutionary idea that kindness isn't naive. It's the bravest thing in the universe.